All right. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Sarah Johnson. I am the Deputy National Director at the Working Families Party. I'm the former Executive Director of Local Progress. Woo! And I am so proud to be the new incoming board chair of the State Innovation Exchange. And I got the distinct honor in inheriting that role of moderating the 9 a.m. panel on the day after everybody was out until like 2 or 3 at the bar. So for the people that made it here, we are so grateful to be in conversation with you. For people that, like myself, kind of dragged themselves out this morning, and we're going to have a great conversation. And before we start, I'm just going to do a little piece for Neha. Some of you might have noticed Neha is losing her voice. And I just want, it can feel a little awkward, feel a little weird, but we're gonna say, Neha is in no pain. She is not sick. And this morning, we might let Jessie do a little more of the talking because maybe she gave too many of you love letters from 8:30 until 3 in the morning last night in the lobby. Great, okay. So with that housekeeping out of the way, so last night we celebrated, and this whole conference, we're celebrating SIX's 10th anniversary as an organization. Many of you have added to the beautiful timeline in the lobby that shows how much the organization has grown. And I'm just curious, was anyone here at the first SIX meeting in 2014? All right.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us over this tremendous journey. So my first SIX conference was in 2016. It was about a month after Donald Trump was elected president. And I have such a tangible memory of coming to that event. It was before Jessie or Neha were here. And I was scared. I felt super alone. I was in a, combination frenetic, hopeless state that I think many of us might remember from that period. And I was only a year into my job at Local Progress, so I was still finding my steady footing. And in the period that I was finding my steady footing, my co-director, my colleague, and one of my best friends, Adi Barkin, was diagnosed with ALS tragically a month before the election. So it was a really devastating time for me across all levels. I was dealing with the twin grief of the election, of my friend Adi, and I was at this random conference that I knew I had to go to because I knew that SIX was this incredibly important organization, and I knew the potential that it had. But I had barely met anybody here. I wasn't really sure what it was, and I gotta say, I came in, and the keynote was dark. It was doom, it was gloom, it was Dems in disarray, blame, blame, blame. And I was okay, let me calibrate a minute and think about how to be in this moment. So I bring back that memory because today's session we're starting is the emphatic opposite of doom and gloom. We're starting our morning today focused on glimmers of hope for the future. And that shift from doom to hope is not an accidental hope, or not an accidental transition. It's an incredibly intentional one that has been built through the last 7 to 8 years of Jessie and Neha's leadership at this organization. And I think what's most important for us to hold in this moment is that transition is not delusional. The world around us is real challenging, and times before us are real hard. So I'm not naive about that, and I don't want to sugarcoat that. But we are so different than we were 8 years ago. The work that we have done to build a beautiful, interconnected, multiracial, governing universe, organizations like Local Progress, like SIX, like our great partners in the Progressive Governance Academy at Repower, we have found ways to build networks, connections, and groups of legislators who are fighting differently, who are fighting better, and who, most importantly, are fighting together. So this morning, we're going to talk a little bit about how we got from that 2016 moment to the moment that we're in now and what it means for the next era of this organization and the, irresistible future that we are dreaming of together. So I'm going to start by asking Jessie and Neha to just reflect a little bit on SIX's evolution, when I first encountered SIX, it was already a very powerful place to convene legislators, but it was not yet the powerful organizing network it is today. For shorthand, I'm going to call that first era the campaign in a box era, and this era the people first era. And so I want you guys to talk a little bit about how we got from that period to where we are today.
Thank you, Sarah. And it's a delight to be on this panel with you and with Neha, because I have both of you to thank and to blame for my role at SIX. I'll get to that part of the story shortly, but I think this transition was intentional. It was curated by people on this stage and in this room over many, many years, and so I want to just share a little bit about that. When SIX was first formed, the idea was we need to have an organization that can counter ALEC. An important charge, right? We see what happens in state houses when copycat legislation bought and paid for by corporate lobbyists, get pushed around by our colleagues, introduced, and then we continue to see that we're in a defensive posture. So the charge was incredibly important. I think when our founders started the organization and merged the initial organizations, there was a sense, well, then let's just do what they do, right? Let's do copycat legislation. Let's put a campaign in a box. And it's a very natural instinct. It's an important one, I get it. We still do exemplary policy with you all as legislators, but we've grown from that position for a very important reason, right? I think as we see the devastating impacts of groups like ALEC on our democracy, the idea that some smart people in a room should just decide what everyone else needs is actually anti-democratic, even if it's us, right? And so there was, I think, a real reckoning in our early years to say, yes, legislators do need policy support. When I was a state legislator, I was one of 100, right? There was 35 state senators, 65 reps, and we had over 600 registered lobbyists in the Capitol, okay? So we know that often the odds are stacked against you. But in that early era, because many of us hold the dual roles, right? We are legislators and we are candidates for public office. I think we really leaned into that identity. This is about campaigning, right? How do we win a messaging battle on, the airwaves about the heart of what America cares about? And so model policy sounds like a really important tool. At the same time, you are people with governing power, which is inherently different than electoral power. When you get elected, you step into your chambers, you have the ability to go and talk to your governor, to your elected leadership, with your colleagues, and you have to know how to take a good idea and make it a reality. That is not the same thing as fundraising or knocking doors, right? These are fundamentally different skills. And so in our evolution, I think a big part of it was to acknowledge that elections and governance are different, the skills are different, and specifically the needs are very different. So a campaign in the box has limited utility. You can raise up an important issue, you can put out the sample tweets, but then you have to go deal with that one colleague in your caucus who's gonna torpedo you because they're looking to run for Congress with the backing of the Chamber of Commerce, right? And so what it presented us collectively as an organization was that we needed to meet legislators differently. Yes, policy support, but I come first into this work as an organizer. And it was clear to me that if we did policy work divorced from community, we could maybe win a short-term bill, and then as soon as it went to rulemaking, or as soon as it was in an agency for 2 years and there was no one beside me or behind me, that would all get eliminated by that 600-person corporate lobby, right? And so we learned those lessons the hard way. I think there's a real desire in a moment like this in 2016 to say, model bills will save us. Just give us the right messaging. Just give me the right tweet and everything will be fine. And in fact, what we've known for a long time is we have to build with our movements on the ground so those folks are formulating policy, right? They have to understand what's at stake. They have to be deeply involved in every single aspect of policy formulation. It's not, we've drafted the bill, we show up to the committee hearing. Way, way, way before that. It's actually centering directly impacted people and policy formulation. Then it's making sure that you as a legislator and those folks that you've been building with actually have a clear plan on how to move that vision forward. This is why we did the shift from model policy to model movement, right? The shift there is going from formulation, rather than having a single bill approach, you can say, oh, we're going to introduce legislation, sure, but maybe I'm not in a state where I can introduce legislation. Maybe it's not possible this year. The conditions aren't there. So how about I look at budget measures? How about I look at the kind of tools I have with administrative officials? What does it look like when I lead differently? Because I know the North Star I'm moving towards. And there are a lot of ways for the water to flow around those rocks. Right? But if you say, my only goal is a model policy, then you lose every other organizing opportunity to get to that horizon. So you have to look bigger, right? So it's formulation, then it's thinking about the broader view. And then when folks are with you in the fight, right? When you are doing the late night calls with them, updating your coalition, having conversations with constituencies all across your state, they're aware of what the trade-offs were. What needs to be fixed next round? What's going to happen in 2, 4, 6 years, right? And then when you're done, when you actually win something big, you have a team of people who are ready to do implementation, right? The end goal is not the passage of the bill. The end goal is, are we materially improving people's lives? The people who fought for it, do they know it exists? Can they access the benefit? If we build affordable housing, is it the folks who need affordable housing getting the affordable housing? Are they sitting on the design committee to make sure that those affordable housing units have in-unit laundry and a place to store their bikes? That's what we mean. It is a fundamentally different orientation of how we think this should work. And it's a virtuous cycle. Because if you have folks on the beginning side formulating policy, are with you in the policy making process and passage, and then are with you with implementation, guess what? You have an entire crew of folks who've seen that democracy can work for them. They are well primed to then step in to lead those agencies. They're well primed to step in and run for office themselves. They're well positioned to ensure that all of that work can continue. So this is how we've evolved at Six. This is the kind of work when you see our repro team, our ag team, our economic power team, you see our state directors, our research and comms team, we've really significantly shifted to say, as we move, who are we moving with? And that's a critical question for each of the people in this room. We didn't get there overnight, and we didn't just magically stumble upon this. Right? I had my own organizing experience. I can share some stories about that, but I want to uplift the leadership of the people on the stage, right? So when I first was interested, well, I was approached many times to be the executive director of Six when the founding ED left. And I said no, I said no, I said no. I met Neha. You heard about our love story last night. And I was like, who is this human? I want to be able to build with this human. And she was leading Six at this incredibly important moment. I knew that there was so much potential that we hadn't yet fulfilled. And so I was very interested. But the other person who came to me was Sarah Johnson. And she said, Jessie, Six is an incredibly important institution. There's something here. There's magic here, and it can grow. Would you be willing to step into leadership? And the reason I said yes to both of these amazing humans is I had seen Sarah lead local progress this way. I've seen Ivan and Fran, who are sitting up here in the front, say, actually, we're going to work with elected officials only in relationship to movement. And we can do that, and no one will get it. Because back 10 years ago, folks were like, collaborative governance work, what do you mean? We just got to win elections. Which, not shockingly, is the New York Times editorials we're seeing now. Just win elections. The governance doesn't matter. The winning of the election is the end goal, and we have folks who are hurting now. No, that didn't resonate with me. But the truth that both of you offered is that we could and should do something differently. Finally, I want to say the reason I could understand how to do that transformation modeled by local progress, seen by each of you in the states, is this thing that we call collaborative governance. Folks say, how do you do it? How do you do it? How do you do it? It's a fractal. You know what a fractal is, math nerds? Right? It's a shape
I don't know what a fractal is.
Okay. It's a small shape that repeats in size as it grows, and so it will replicate at the large scale what is at the small scale, right? And so when we talk about collaborative governance, very specifically, we're talking about the change in the personal, the change in the organizational, and the change in society, right? So because I had two partners who were leading with love, I said, I'm empowered to lead with love. That's the personal. Right? I can say that there's a big vision and I'm going to take risks. And I know that this is actually what communities need because I've been with legislators on the ground. I've been with movement partners on the ground who need that change. Yeah, we can do this differently. And then when we got into our positions at Six, our organization needed a lot of fine-tuning, updating, changing our model, changing our finances. All of those things had to happen. And then we said, okay, what if we paid our employees well? What if we actually did paid sick time and paid family leave and paid maternity leave? And what if we made sure that we had the resources for our teams to thrive, right? We actually implemented every policy we advocated for on the outside, on the inside. Wild, right? But then it gave us the credibility to say, we are employers. We have 40 staff. Oh, what do you mean you can't implement paid leave? Oh, we are employers. We're an organization that has said we're going to center care and rest. What do you mean you can't do that as legislators? Right? And we've seen many legislators say that's not possible for me right now. And we've had legislators who've given birth, and then the next day be required to go vote on the floor of the House or the Senate because there's no paid time off. But then you see it further down, right? Now you see legislators who are using and have gotten permission to use campaign funds for childcare, fighting for maternity leave and legislative office. This is how the personal goes to the organizational, goes to the society, right? When we practice the things in our bodies, then they become real.
I love that. So this is a room full of leaders who are seeking to transform our society. They don't have small goals. They have real big ones, right? So I love that you started with a sort of personal, organizational, and societal, because I think it can be, we are ambitious, we have big goals, the problems we face are astronomical, and we are always focused on how we get our work to scale. We shouldn't have power if we're not trying to figure out how to use the most of it to do the most good for the most people. And you guys are really starting with grounding in the personal. And I want to just dig in a little bit about what that's meant for you as individuals. So Six is a powerful organizing network trying to change our society. It's not a self-help group, but why are we starting here with personal transformation, and what has that meant to you as individual leaders?
Excuse me. I can start. I think when we think about systems and scale change, you think about, okay, well, if we get into a coalition and we have shared values and we have the same end outcome, isn't that enough to get something to be a winning strategy or a winning outcome? The thing is, no, not at all, actually. You can be in common purpose. We can be comrades and we can know that we have a vision for what something should look like. But individual people and everything that they are, not just what their job is, their title is, or what they do from 9 to 5 or beyond. As complex individuals, we're the ones that actually make up the system. We're the ones that make the rules. We're the ones that actually collectively come together and build norms. And so if we're not transforming individuals to actually remain in a social contract with each other, the social contract is nil. And I think that's a little bit of what we're seeing, right? So when we talk about what does it require, that was a very deeply personal question for me as I thought about what it meant to lead. Because it's not enough just to say, I want to be a leader, or I want to be able to impact something, or, hey, my title affords me the right and the opportunity to put my vision out there. That's actually not enough. You have to be in right relationship with the people that are standing right next to you. And to do that doesn't just mean listening and saying, how can I be your ally? Y'all, you have to do it for yourself. What are you bringing in to that relationship, to that right relationship where your journey is first? Because in that, you can actually transform the way that people engage and receive you, and vice versa. And so I'll talk a little bit about what that's meant for me in my own journey and how that applies to here. So I think many of you might have heard in yesterday afternoon's panel about authoritarianism in India. I'm a South Asian woman. I'm a first generation eldest daughter of immigrant parents from India. And we were, maybe I'll say, I'm not going to do a history lesson, but for those of you in the room, real quick, Indian fascists have been able to exploit religious fractals in India between Hindus, Muslims, and Christians. I'm a Hindu majority. I come from that majority. My family comes from that majority. The state that I come from in India borders Pakistan. And so when the British folks left about 75 years ago, left India after 400 years of colonial rule, they did it in a way that we all started killing each other. And that has continued for 75 years. So just 22 years ago, in Gujarat, which is the state I come from, which is the state that Prime Minister Narendra Modi comes from, there were riots there where Muslim businesses, communities, families were targeted, and thousands of them were murdered in state-sanctioned violence. Police didn't do shit, and it was sanctioned. And I'll say that, my husband, who was a student leader at the time, in college at that time, he was organizing folks to hide people in his home so that they wouldn't come after him because he was a part of a Hindu majority. So he's like, yep, my Muslim friends are coming to my house. They will not touch you here. What ended up happening is that complex people bring a lot of those identities to what happens in those kinds of violent situations. And what I'll say is this. There was a lot of folks who weren't able to protect everybody, and he carries a lot of deep hurt from that. And in that 20-year time, Muslim neighborhoods were kept separate from Hindu neighborhoods. They're not allowed to move into each other's neighborhoods. We don't talk to each other. Fast forward to, I was a part of a cohort. I don't know if Arish is in the room. I'm gonna tell a story. Brother, where are you? Are you here? Is he sleeping? We were out late. All right, he'll hear about it, but he knows I'm telling this story. So I met Harish Patel a couple of years ago in a cohort of mine, and we come from the same town in Gujarat. In fact, he immigrated here when he was 14. And everybody in the cohort just assumed that we were related, or that, we were friends, we must be family, and he's Muslim, and I am Hindu. And he's like, no, it's quite possible that 20 years ago, our families actually raised arms up against each other. And I was like, oh, you went there right away. And, but yes, that's true, that probably happened. What I'll say is this, in the time that I was in relationship with him, I wasn't taught to hate that man because my parents, after partition, they weren't taught to hate. My mother tells me all the time, she's like, you can decide what you do with your generational hate. You can either choose to do that journey and figure out if that's your risk to carry, because people sitting in other identities and bodies may not be able to carry the risk for you. So what is your water to carry? So as someone who comes from a majority community, I had to do a lot of that type of work. With my family who lives in India, listen, they are Modi supporters. They love him to death because he gives them clean water and electricity and says girls should go to school. So they're like, sure, whatever the cost of that is, even if it is the murder of my neighbor, I will take it. And so for me, when I was going to India after COVID, I didn't know Harish hadn't seen his mom, and I was like, hey, I would love to go meet your mother, and if you need anything from India, I'll bring it back for you. And he's like, cool, I'll make sure that you are protected. And I was like, I'll make sure my family does not follow me. That's real. That's real. I have to actually protect that concept because we have to be able to take that risk. When my husband heard that I was going to that neighborhood, he was like, you cannot go alone. I was like, I can. My brother will protect me. I'll be okay. In that exchange, it so happened that his mother then sent food to our home. My family flipped out. They were like, can we eat this food? I was like, you will eat this food. Everybody quietly and awkwardly ate food, like we were drinking water, they were in our house. It took a generation, but other folks didn't feel like they could take the risk. But I was actually left wondering, for a community that has actually been oppressed, violated against, and still continues this day, how do they have such love in their hearts? How do they accept me and love me? They don't know me. They don't know what risk I bring. So it's my responsibility to carry the water and take on that risk for myself when I can. What I mean by that to say is when we actually get into right relationship with each other, we can actually see each other's stories as whole. We can actually figure out it's not always equal, the risk we carry. And we have to be able to decide, if I am in right relationship with you, what is mine to carry, and how will we then bring that into the work we do in common purpose, in that coalition, in that policy, in that framework, in the fight? Because if I don't know how to do that with you, that coalition is gonna fail. And so I think for us, I looked at my husband, had never set foot in that neighborhood after those riots, but he came with me because he said, if you have a brother in that neighborhood, then I have a brother in that neighborhood. My kids were shocked. I have a 21-year-old and a 25-year-old, and they've grown up with this rhetoric their whole life. Now, they don't hate, but they know what our family's about. But they were shocked at our family's transformation to change. And now they see that as their responsibility to say, okay, I live in a country where I can carry different risk in my body and my identity for others who have been carrying water for me, but maybe I gotta do it differently to be in right relationship with you so we can build together. So that is how I took my mother's advice to me to say, what is your generation hate to put down and to carry? And I'm so excited that my kids are witnessing that. But it didn't come from a policy. It didn't come from let me lecture you on how to love everybody, because that's actually not how it works. We actually had to individually think about, what does it mean for me to be in right relationship first? And then we can trust each other to take risks and build. So just share that.
I get to hang with her every single day. So this is the power of hearing her accessible brilliance I was talking about last night. I want to share and build on what Neha just shared, because I think a lot of folks are like, well, we just got to do the scale first, and this personal work doesn't matter. And we have a dear friend and our coach in the room, in the back there.
Is Maura here?
Maura's in the
There
back.
you are.
And she always is just dropping bombs of wisdom to both of us and how we help to share our stories and also the stories of this work. She said something to us right after the election. She said, under stress, people will do what they've always done. Under stress, people will do what they've always done, right? And so if we are not practicing new moves, then we will do what we've always done, right? We will get small. We will isolate. We will not connect. And then you're going to be tasked to go do big change. But if your natural instinct is to do the thing you've always done, you're not going to be reaching for those things. But this is the power of personal transformation. When you actually practice new moves, you have other moves that you've always done, right? You're starting to say, oh, what if I started to reach for right relationship? What if I actually started to model with my friends, with my family, right? And it's hard because in legislative life or in organizing life, many of the structures are literally not designed for us, right? The habits of white supremacy culture, of urgency, of lack of transparency, of like individualism. I just described committee structure, right? Like, or nonprofits. But when you start to do the personal transformation, you start to say, oh, how does that apply beyond me? You model it and you live it. How many of you have worked on increases to the minimum wage on campaigns that didn't pay the minimum wage? I did. Sorry, that might date me, but yes, that used to be a thing. Or worked for organizations that didn't pay interns, right? When we were advocating for worker rights. Those things still happen in our movement. So you have to practice it first at home, right? Build it to the organization and then bring it to society, because then it gives you the moves to make.
All right, so I think that what I really want to draw out of all of this is going back to this like campaign in the box, people first, is really this idea that what we're also trying to do is not just talk about what we're trying to accomplish, but how we do it. And when we're trying to do things differently, when we're trying to do things in ways that are countercultural to the institutions that we are working our daily lives in, it requires a huge amount from us as like personal leaders of courage, of bravery, of willingness to try to do things differently, and like, you know, just grounding so much in Neha's story of how we only get that by starting with ourselves, with our communities, with our relationships with other people. So now I want to zoom back out from individual to the change that that the legislators in this room, that we are trying to make in the world. So Jessie, you know, you said we're sort of trying to make change in these like institutions completely undesigned for our leadership. We are trying to turn a highly individualistic endeavor that is like competitive and ego-driven and like cutthroat at times and like, you know, can be kind of cruel into like a loving and collaborative and honest and grounded way to work together. So no like, you know, whatever, that's pretty hard. But what can it look like when we are doing things that way? Like, what can we accomplish because we are exercising governance in this grounded, collaborative, and more transformative way that is different than, you know, what normally happens?
Yeah, thanks for that question, and I'm excited to talk about it because I get to see so many folks who've been on this journey with us in this room. So at 6, our theory of change includes people, practice, policy, power, and permanence. And although I end at permanence, it's really where we begin. We want permanent change for our communities. We want large-scale change for our communities. We don't want to win for just 2 years and then have the bill upended or rescinded. We don't want people to get access to food benefits and food security for it just to disappear, right? We want permanence. We got to be loud about that. But you have to start at people, right? And so when you grow this into our organizing strategies, you actually start with people. Not as campaigners, not as just tools for a broader vision. And what I mean by that is there's examples throughout our organizing work at 6. Many of you have heard from our breakout sessions about our global delegations who've gone to other communities. Guess what? It was legislators who first shared meals and then shared meals with activists in places like Mexico and El Salvador and Dominican Republic. They went and visited folks who had been incarcerated for abortion. We didn't say, here's the bill, the one bill that you must pass, go do it. We said, are you a person? Are you living a full life? What might that be like? You want to laugh with us? You want to share some downtime, get to know each other one-on-one? Wow, how amazing. When we've done work on coastal convenings, or we've taken folks to, sustainable ag places, we start with relationship. People, right? And that is a novel concept because so often it's like, well, you are a legislator, therefore you are a target. I need to tell you my demand. And then from there, I'm moving on. But legislators are people, advocates are people. How may we actually break that distrust, that distance? It is starting with people. And then you reinforce that relationship through practice, right? How can you constantly come back in formation? So many of you work with our state directors. And the way that you reinforce through practice is you say, okay, how do we hold you as people? How do we pull you closer to movement? And not just, on a campaign stop. But have you toured tribal communities outside of ledge session in Nevada? One of our partners, Teresa's here, Stacy Shin, and we were working on back there, woo-woo, right? We were going to work on democracy policy, and Stacy and Teresa were like, what if we just took folks to Indian country and built relationship on a bus and spent time sharing meals? So yeah, the democracy policy passed, and then a slew of other changes happened because when those legislators were in relationship with people, they said, there's so many other issues we can be working on. We have the depth of trust. Let's continue to move those policies, right? It's reinforcing with practice. That's what you do. We've talked about the work we've done on anti-LGBTQ bills, and this is where model policy comes in, right? There's a bunch of really good poison pill amendments that folks can put on bills. There's a lot of ways that we can initiate litigation, but our research team, right, Anthony's here in the back, in partnership with IDA and our state directors, were like, let's build this resource bank. I think Hutch might be here still from Equality Federation. All those folks were like, okay, we need to resource folks who are on the front lines beating back these awful bills. And what we could have done is just hand legislators the poison pill amendments, right? The strategy for litigation. We could have just said, here, legislator, move alone. But to get access to the resource bank, you have to name who your partner is in the ground. They have to vouch for you as a legislator that they're working with you, because if a legislator puts a poison pill amendment on that they can turn into litigation strategy, someone has to be there to do it, right? It is people and practice. And then there's policy, right? We've already talked about the aspects of policy formulation, but you have to do that with a clear view of the world you're building towards. This is why we do political education work, because often we will pass policy that is counterproductive to the next part, which is power. Right? I shared this in one of my breakouts earlier, but I was very proud during my time in the legislature to work on affordable housing and to significantly expand affordable housing. But because of Tabor in Colorado, it meant the only tool I had was to create a low-income housing tax credit that gave developers a lot of money to build low-income housing. I won on the policy. In 2 and 4 years after that, those developers came after every single local issue and beat us back because I had put millions of dollars in their pocket. I won on policy, but I lost on power. I regret that work, although I am proud of that work, right? I have people more housed in my community, but it was because I didn't have the tool to be more savvy. I didn't have the political education to say, if I do this, what is the power outcome? Yes, I won on the policy. Yes, we have more affordable housing. And yes, developers are more wealthy and can block every other local measure. I did that. Right? So people, practice, policy, power. When you can put those things in together, guess what you get? Permanence. Permanence, that's what happens, right? But we have to be thinking beyond the 1-year timeline or the 2-year timeline for the next campaign. We overestimate what we can do in a year. We underestimate what we can do in a decade. But when we use that framework, when organizations use that framework, when legislators use that framework, end goal permanence, starting place people, practice, policy, power, then we win. And I know it because I've lived it, right? I'm going to tell a very quick story. Joe gave the wrong story about driver's licenses last night. I did not engage in assaults. It was maybe some light catty fighting. But the story I will tell you all, I did have the distinct honor of running driver's licenses for undocumented folks. And last year, I got to go to the 10-year anniversary celebration of that program. Yeah, give it up. My Colorado friends, is Julie in the room? Hey. So Julie was my my comrade in arms that we've been organizing together for 2 decades or more. But we got to be in that room. And in that room, we got to celebrate that there are over 500,000 people in Colorado who now hold an immigrant driver's license. Yes, please cheer. Yes, thank you. Those folks are not going to be deported because they have a broken tail light. They're not going to be deported because they look like an immigrant. We actively decoupled local law enforcement from federal immigration enforcement. So when we're talking about raids now and someone gets pulled over and they have a Colorado ID, guess what? It's going to be a lot harder for the folks who want to fuck with us to fuck with us, right? In that room, we had folks who have their driver's licenses. We also had the old tias who had trained people to go and take the driver's test. We had those same organizers in every single county in Colorado with the DMV employees embracing them in arms. The reason that happened is Julie and I, back in the day, we had been organizing on immigrant rights for our entire lives. I ran for office, Julie ran my campaign, and when I got elected, I was like, Julie, help me, we could do driver's licenses. Our community had been organizing on it. And they said, can we push it legislatively? And I said, I don't know, let's try. And when we did, every Thursday night, I'm looking back at Julie, every Thursday night, until about midnight, me and Julie would be in an office on a speakerphone with all of the immigrant rights groups across Colorado. Whenever an amendment was pushed, when the governor said we can't do this or we need to update, the DMV system, folks consented. When we got to a point where the driver's license was just going to be a license to deport because they only wanted to include undocumented folks, we went to asylees and refugees and dreamers and folks with DACA and people who had legal permanent residence and said, can you be included in the license category? We did all of that together, so when I left office and Julie got into office, she continued the fight. We had other legislators in this room who helped to pass and move that legislation, grew it over time, and so when we got to the 10-year celebration, we were embracing the DMV employees because they had been our co-partners in co-governance. They focused on permanence. The goal was to keep people safe. Guess what? They are. You can do it. It was really, really hard, though. And it was real bumpy in the beginning. But you have to do the personal risk. There's a moment that I call my Selena moment. I will forever claim this moment. Me and Julie and my husband went to a community accountability meeting at a dance club bar. And folks were pissed off because it looked like we were going to lose the bill. And we had been working day in and day and night to pass it. And folks are like pushing up against the stage. You know that moment in Selena when they're like, oh, get Selena out of from the fence? My husband was like, we got to get out of here. But Julie and I stood our ground, and we talked about what was going on. We felt people's pain, and we said we're going to fight even harder. And we went back and did, and that's how the slapping fight happened, okay? That's why I told the speaker, you want to come at me? There's a whole community who will come at you too. Permanence. We can do it.
I love this. I get to work with this one every day.
So permanence in time, Neha has been shouted out yesterday from the stage as, what was it? Being a time enthusiast. So maybe, well, first, Neha, do you want to add anything to this one before I jump us into the next
Maybe
one?
the only thing to add, maybe not.
Take your time. If you got something to say.
I think, first of all, I love, every time Jessie tells this story, I love hearing it. I never get tired of it. It's what makes him think that everything is possible if you have a dream and you have love of people. His leadership in this way is, so it's just, I love the story, and I was there when you were preparing and got the invitation to that 10-year anniversary. It was a really emotional moment, and it was really exciting to see that happen for you. I think the other way that we talked about, how do we actually start with people? What does that mean? Like, it's not just, hey, it's a person and we can just talk. Again, it doesn't start that way. One of the things that we had tried to do at 6, was it 22 Outside Voices? 21, it's a blur. We said, what would it look like if movement and legislators got in a room for a couple of days and dreamt together? It's not about let's put a list of 50 policies on there, and it's not about we need an agenda and a set of outcomes, and we need to know exactly what we're doing when we get out of here. The goal was, do we know who we are when we get out of here? And do we know how to be in relationship with each other? Do we know how we're going to flank each other when we get out of here? If we started there. And so, we're so proud. I don't know if there are Outside Voices folks in the room. Okay. It's legislators and partners alike. We brought about 50 people together 3 times in 2021 and 22. In various places. It was almost like a retreat. It was facilitated by our brilliant team at CoLab, of which Maura is one of the founders. Is Vega out there? Oh, yes, very awesome. And we said to them, we want legislators and movements to basically be together as humans in a room. And we want them to put their armor down. We want them to dream. But y'all, you know that in order to dream and get creative, you need rest. You need to feel safe. And if you don't have safety and you don't have rest, we are not able to actually do the thing that we don't know we need. And so what we did is we curated a space for people to rest, to feel safe, to be in relationship, and say, that is your only job. And we're going to do that a couple of times, and we're going to see what comes of it. What came of it was a beautiful vision for what it looked like when we had all the things for all of our people. And it didn't just mean for some of us, right? It takes a lot of safety and risk and rest to say, I want that for all of us, even those folks that we don't actually agree with. And so I just want to be able to say that there is a way to start with people that is slow. I mean, listen, folks showed up real skeptical. Half the people were like, why did I get invited? Is this like sort of like a hangout space? A little bit, yes. You got invited because it's a value, if your values aligned and you care about dreaming for something different and you want to be in a different kind of right relationship with the people that you're building with, then let's start there. And that's not slow work, and it's not like a meeting. It's not even a drink, although we can share many drinks and get there, but like it is safety and is rest. And so I think that's part of being people, and that's why we start there too.
I also sometimes jokingly refer to Outside Voices as Jessie and Neha's work wedding, for those that saw the Love Fest last night. Okay, so I want to ground us with this idea of time and permanence. And maybe just offer a little space for folks in the audience to do like some self-reflection. So I'm gonna like make everyone close your eyes. You can even like, ground yourself, whatever you need. And think about yourself 10 years ago. Think about how old you were, what was your family like, what kind of job did you have, where were you in the world? Were you a student? Were you, just like where were you 10 years ago? And think of something that you have done over the last decade that 10 years ago you would be like, oh, you could never do that. That's never gonna happen. That's impossible. Okay, now I want you to think about 10 years in the future you. If you've got kids, they're 10 years older. Maybe you're not a legislator anymore. Maybe you've got a different job. Maybe you've moved, whatever. 10 years in the future you, maybe you're retired. That would be so lovely for any of us. And I want you to think about what is the thing that 10-year future you wants to say to you right now about what you think is impossible, about what you think can't happen, about what makes you feel hopeless, and about what makes you feel in struggle. Okay, so our session today is called Glimmers of Hope. So I think I'm going to close it out by asking Jessie and Neha to talk a little bit about what is giving them hope in, what are undeniably really, really challenging times, and how we use some of the tools that we've talked about in this session to get from like the 1-year vision to the 10-year vision. And so, you guys are obviously gonna be in totally different places in 10 years doing totally different things, but what is giving you hope as you think about the next decade for our movement, for this organization, for your leadership?
I'm just sitting in that 10-year ago me and the 10-year in the future me, and rooting in the hope of that, having the anchor of my children and of my grandchildren, and thinking about where they're going to be, how they're going to be. I think for me, the glimmers of hope I see are the very powerful conversations I've had in this room with people who've stepped more fully into their leadership. And what I mean by that is, for a long time, we've known that this moment has been coming. Even if it wasn't going to take this form, there were going to be these fights. And other risks are around us too, climate change and the revenue cliff in states and all those things. And I remember at one of the Outside Voices, we had a conversation with Washington State Senator Noelle Frame. Is Noelle in the room? She may be setting up for a session. And she was like, you know, we should probably do something about progressive revenue. Someone should do something about progressive revenue. Someone should really like try and tax the billionaires.
Maybe it should be us.
Well, she was like, well, someone, right? And I was like, you just ran the capital gains bill. She's like, yeah, and no one wants to run progressive revenue and tax billionaires. But someone should. And I was like, why not you? I was like, I don't know. I was like, why not you? She's like, I don't know. And then she's like, why not me? Okay, why not me? And so over the last 3 years, she's been quietly partnering with us, with the State Revenue Alliance, and with legislators in 16 states to actually field test progressive revenue strategies. Guess what? Those billionaires that bought the most transphobic ads on TV are going to have their assets seized. I'm ready. I live in Pennsylvania. I saw the most terrific shit on TV. No one should be a billionaire. It is immoral. And guess what? We have tools, we have policy tools that have been used in this country's history to make sure that we can fund things like public education, like childcare, like universal health care, like making sure that our communities are safe in all the ways, that we protect our water, we protect our air, we protect our folks from pollution. That is all possible within reach. Do you know why I know that? Because our air and our water started to get clean during the pandemic when we made different choices. When, you know, asthma outburst in my family that lived near the refinery went down because no one was working at the refinery. Is it possible? Yeah. It is a set of decisions we make. So people who are stepping in and saying, someone should do something, someone should do something. Guess what? It is you who are the someone who should be doing something. And that's if you're a legislator or if you're an organizer. This next year, many of those legislators who are working on revenue are going to be moving those bills as soon as the federal government says, we have no money for this. Guess what? We know where the money is. We've done the fiscal analysis. We're real clear about who lives in Aspen and who lives in Seattle. Right? So you want to move your assets? Great. Here's all the states that are going to run the same damn bill. And we're going to do it with movement partners, not a copycat bill. Right? This is what gives me hope in this moment, that there are folks who are coordinating at the level of strategy, who understand that we can, across state line, within our states, across this country, actually move fundamentally differently. The other thing that's giving me hope right now is, so my daughter is 14, and we live across the street from the high school. We moved to a more suburban area outside of Pittsburgh, and our rainbow flag is surrounded by Trump signs, right? And we put up our rainbow flag right across from the high school because we're queer parents and we have a queer kid. And so we are out and proud. We've always been. And a lot of folks are like, that's a little risky, right? What will happen? What will happen is we'll meet it. But my daughter walks across the street every day, unless it's 20 degrees, then she makes me drive her across the street to the high school. But by doing that, she walks in front of every single bus that's turning into the high school, right? And every person sees this little brown girl with the queer flag on her house walk across the street. So she's become famous or infamous, I don't know how you want to say it, at the school as being like of the queer family. During National Coming Out Day, she was bombarded at the GSA. She's like, how do I do this? How do I come out? Like, we want to know the secrets. How did you come out to your dads? And she was like, I was like, dads, I got a girlfriend. Like, that was it. And it was one of those moments where I saw my kid living into her fullness and that she had been shown love from the get, right? When I was coming out, I didn't know if I would lose my family. I didn't know what would happen to me. I don't have a generation of elders before me because AIDS took many of them, right? So I felt deeply alone when I came out. And now my kid has had an experience where it was just assumed that she would be loved. And now all the queer kids come to our house. Right? And they're like, oh, it could be like that. it could be like that. And my kid is the living embodiment of, yeah, we're going to love you. Y'all want to go to the mall? Let's go. Like, my dad will take us and we'll sing karaoke. She hates when I sing karaoke with them, but yes, I will sing the karaoke with them. But 10-year ago me, if I had imagined that for my kiddo who was 4 then, I would not have imagined that for her. 10 years before that, I would not have imagined that for myself. I didn't know I didn't have the legal right to marry. I didn't think it would be possible to adopt kids, and now I have 2 grandkids, a 4-year-old and 1-year-old. An 18-year-old me who was celibate did not understand how that math would work, right? Real clear that there are times when we look back on our past selves and say, what would it mean? And then we choose impossible. We say, how might we? And I think this is the glimmer of hope that is embodied in Neha and I's leadership. We never say you can't. We say, how might we? Oh, that sounds hard, so how might we? This sounds challenging, how might we? Oh, I see it differently, how might we? And it is that just practical act that roots us back in the idea that hope is not, it's not silly. You gotta hope for the things, you gotta fight for the things, because then they become the reality that you create.
Yes, that's true. I think for me, excuse me. Thank you. Community water, it's good. When I was like 10-year ago me, my Lord, I was single, I was globetrotting, I was not taking care of myself, and I wasn't actually living in my full power. I was actually really afraid to do that. I feel like I let a lot of systems and structures tell me that I had to prove all the things 40 times over for me to be justified in where I wanted to be. And I was actually, when you told me to close my eyes, I was like, oh, I don't know. It was a hard person. It was a hard person to be, actually. It was very self-defeating, I will say. So I started, it was almost 8 years ago, in an uncommon, very unpredictable journey into leadership in a front-facing way. And I'm not really a front-facing person. Anyone that knows me knows I actually hate public speaking. I'm terrified of it. It's actually, all those things scare me because I'm like, I need to be perfect when I present myself because the way that I am doesn't really conform to the way everybody else might be. And so that was actually hard for me to sit in. As I fast forward and think about, the last 10 years and what's given me hope, I have been in community with people and in right relationship with people that has not only transformed me, but I wanted to say, if my life or what I choose means something, I wanted to feel like other people who look like me, who have the same fears as me, who can share that, also feel empowered to step into their full leadership. And if anything I do, if any risk I can take, actually makes that more feasible, makes it more accessible, then that's why I did it. It's why I took this job. I want other Black and brown women to feel like leadership is for them. I want them to feel like they don't have to prove shit to get into this role and say, I have an idea, I'm gonna do it this way. And even if we fail, because we're gonna fail, it's not rocket science that we're gonna fail. But there's a community of people who say, cool, try it again, try something else, because you'll learn something along the way. That was leadership to me, and I am so blessed that my journey in the last decade has been in relationship with this beautiful man right here, these beautiful women right here, these beautiful people right here. Y'all, all of you have actually flanked me. And leadership doesn't need to be like a singular, have it all right, get all the qualifications, then you can do it. I've been in collective leadership with y'all for the last 8 years. And my daughter is 25. And she is like, she came to me, she got out of grad school and she's looking for a job. And I was like, I was like, would you ever want to do like leadership or management? She's like, 10 years ago, I would have said no. Like, she's like, I just want to like not work that hard. And I was like, okay, well, you're a daughter of immigrants, so that's not going to work out. But, and but she said to me, she's like, but the way you and Jessie do it makes me think that I can do it too. And doing this work, but I will tell you, many of you don't know my daughter, but you work in love for my daughter. And that's where it got her to. She was like, I don't think that was for me, but she's like, y'all show me that that's possible. She actually came on a trip that our Rockwood cohort took. It's a community of leaders that are selected every year by the Rockwood Institute. And she decided to join 25 strangers who were movement leaders on a trip to Puerto Rico for 6 days. And by the end of it, she was doing Tai Chi in the ocean with everybody being like, I've got moves. So to me, you know, that's another brown girl who thinks that anything is possible for her. She was like, oh, I saw it. That makes it work. And she didn't see me do it in a way that extracted from her, extracted from us. She didn't see me do it at the expense of myself. And she actually recognized that there was a partnership involved and there was a collective community. So now she pours back into that community. My daughter loves the kids of those people that are in the room. Zoya and her, she's like, she's her auntie. And so I think for me, as I think about the next 10 years, what's giving me hope, look at all the people in this room who are stepping into their leadership, who did not think that was possible. Maybe some of you are out there thinking like, I don't know if that other leadership is for me. It is. It is, and you don't need for anyone to wait to tell you that. But if I can spend my next 10 years trying to figure out how to make that accessible, possible in any way that I can flank y'all, because I don't know your kids either, or your families, or your beloveds, but I will certainly endeavor for it, and that's what gives me hope.
All right, so I think that the best way to close this out is to just say that what is giving me hope is this progression from somebody should do something about that to maybe me, maybe I could do something about that, to how might we do it together, to like, and fuck it, we might mess up, and then we'll just try again, right? So that's the posture that I'm gonna try to hold from this panel, from this session, from this amazing organization, and for like the really, really hard times that are ahead of us, they call us to that level of someone should do it, maybe it's me, how can we do it together, and how can we not be afraid of failure? How can we not let that be the limiting thing that stops us from, you know, the 10-year us saying like, this is the totally impossible thing that we figured out. So thank you guys so much. Jessie, Neha, you are like, I'm so proud to call you, like, not just my colleague, but my dear friend, and you're not getting rid of any of us, even as you move on to your next steps, and you're always gonna be with Six as an organization as we move forward. And then I think we have some really boring logistical things we need to say.